Vittorina Levi was born in Venice on the 16th of August, 1926. By her friends and family, she was known as Rina. She lived in the Venetian ghetto for the first 17 years of her life, with her mother, father, and 5 younger siblings, Alda, Angelo, Leonella, Lina, and Mario. On the 5th of December 1943, she and her family were forced from their home and loaded onto trains alongside their Jewish neighbors and shipped away to the Italian holding camp at Fossoli, then soon on another train to Auschwitz. It has now been almost exactly 2 years since I saw Vittorina's name on a wall of remembrance in the Venice ghetto. When I embarked on this journey, I had just turned 18, the same age Vittorina was when she was murdered by the Nazis. 2 years have passed now, and I have officially grown older than her. A very strange feeling to grow older than someone whom I have spent so long coming to know and consider as a parallel life, an equal across the expanse of time and situation. In the process of uncovering her story, I came to feel some kind of intensity of connection to this other life, this other young woman. She was and is a life so far from mine, but one which, as I uncovered its details further and further, was so much intimately closer to my own existence than I ever could have imagined. Even now, in attempting to do her story justice by revisiting it some 2 years later, I can already feel the distance that time has created between us. She will remain with me always, but I will never feel that same intimacy of time placement that I felt when I first began this project and was truly her parallel. It's a loss, but somehow a very just one, I think. Somewhere in some pinpoint of held time, she and I stand side by side, before time sputters and starts again, and we move, always away. In the first days of the new year, my dad and I returned to Germany to uncover the final pieces of Vittorina's story. We arrived at Buchenwald concentration camp on the 4th of January 2019. Buchenwald was not technically an extermination camp, as most camps within the actual borders of Germany were not. However, although systematic mass execution did not take place in these camps, prisoners were murdered consistently by many other means, including execution both by shooting and by phenol injection to the heart. Buchenwald was a work camp, but its technical label certainly did not pardon it as any less brutal an environment. Buchenwald was divided into over 130 subcamps, and it is almost certain that Vittorina was placed in the subcamp of Allendorf, the women's camp. The women in this camp worked forced labor in the nearby ammunitions factory, working 12-hour shifts with the meagerest of food and water rations, marching the 6 miles there and back each day, and throughout their days working barehanded and with no protection whatsoever from the constant contact with the highly poisonous ammunition material. The poison was so intense that it turned their exposed skin a deep yellow shade, and according to Allendorf survivor Eva Fahidi, they were known and referred to by the locals of Weimar as the Lemons. There were approximately 29,000 female inmates held in Buchenwald camp between 1941 and 1945. Over the complete duration of its operation, Buchenwald camp had imprisoned approximately 240,000 prisoners. On the 11th of April, 1945, the 21,000 surviving prisoners were liberated by American troops. Vittorina was not among them. Vittorina Levi died of illness on the 18th of February, 1945, in Buchenwald concentration camp, 400 miles from her home. She died just 2 months before Buchenwald's liberation, and approximately 6 months before the end of the war. Her younger sister, Alda, marched out of Birkenau on the Death March from Auschwitz in January of 1945. Anne Frank and her sister Margot marched the same journey, and both died in Bergen-Belsen camp of typhus in February of that year. Alda Silvana Levi died on the 7th of February, 1945, at Bergen-Belsen camp. The sisters, Vittorina and Alda, would not meet again. No member of the Levi family survived the Holocaust. When I think back now on my first journey from Venice to Auschwitz, I'm always surprised by the memories that return to me most clearly. Not necessarily the ones I might have expected to. One moment remains with me very vividly, and I find myself thinking on it often. When I visited Auschwitz I, the structures were much better preserved than they were at Birkenau, primarily because just before the camp's liberation, the Nazis made a mass effort to detonate most of the structures in Birkenau in an attempt to erase the evidence of the extermination facilities. For whatever reason, Auschwitz I was left almost completely intact. Because of this, at Auschwitz I there remains an intact gas chamber. The room was one of the most horrifying sights in the entire camp complex. It's quite dark inside the chamber and very cold. I stood there for some time before leaving through the entrance that the victims were brought in through, and thinking distinctly what an enormous and horrible privilege it was to re-enter the outside world through the door that hundreds of thousands only ever passed one way. I remembered that feeling this year after leaving Buchenwald. We caught a train from Weimar station and made our way through Germany, Austria, and into Italy. When I fell asleep, the station names outside were German, and when I woke up in the morning, they were Italian. I had this same strange and heartbreaking privilege of making the return train journey to Vittorina's home. 247 Jewish Venetians were deported under the Nazi regime, and only 8 would ride that return train years later to see their home again. Completing this journey this time around was admittedly a strange experience. The initial discovery and uncovering of Vittorina's story 2 years back was such an intense and deeply emotional experience that somehow I think I anticipated that feeling would appear again this time, in visiting the place where she died. I would be fabricating emotional gravity if I said that it was the same. This trip was so much more subtle. It made me realize, I think, how deeply crushing it is how little we know. And of course, as humans, when there are no answers, we have to create our own. I built this story around Vittorina out of pieces of other experiences. Everything is unsure. Everything is guesswork. But of course it is. To suggest that the individuality of this story is any clearer than a few dates and placeholders in the depths of some archive is to downplay the sheer enormity of the number of those who were murdered by the Shoah. So few lives have been remembered individually. So few could. And so many are lost in the masses forever. This search for Vittorina has been an incredible journey with so many strange revelations, but in the end I cannot pretend that this is a story I can ever build a satisfactory or kind ending for. These things do not wrap up in a neat bundle the way we so badly want them to. Perhaps in the end there is no rational response to events that defy comprehension. While we try our hardest and must always continue to try to reach an understanding, we must also accept that there are some questions that we are simply not equipped to answer. In some cases, acknowledgement and reflection are the most that we as objective observers can give. Some questions can deliver us no final resolution that fits our satisfaction, and in the end can only offer silence.